Our ancient reading is from chapter 40 of the book of Psalms from the Hebrew Scriptures. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Our modern reading is from Rainer Maria Rilke, who is often considered one of the German language's greatest 20th century poets. He wrote, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms, and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given to you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer."
Before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. Parker Palmer, the Quaker author, educator, and spiritual guide to millions, wrote those words. Before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. This month, our covenant groups are focusing on the art of listening. A couple of weeks ago, Judy Tomlinson delivered a sermon on that same topic, and she quoted, by the way, Parker Palmer extensively in that sermon. Seems to me that if ever there was a particular moment in time when focusing on listening was a good idea, that moment is now. Some members of Congress, for example, have failed miserably of late as role models for good listening. Their heads have been so filled with ideologies that they have not been able to hear their own heart's yearnings for democracy, their heart's yearnings for compassion, or even for the common good. They could not hear the pain of the citizens of this country, pain that came about in large part because of Congress's inability to listen to their constituents and connect their ambition to the needs of the people that they were elected to serve. It seems that now might be a good time to start a grassroots movement to promote listening. We, the people, need to think about and to talk about listening so that we might be able to better practice it. We need to practice listening so that we can get better at it, so that we can get good at it. We need to get good at it so that we might be better prepared to let go of those things that separate us from one another, so that we might better connect with one another, so that we, the people, might better promote the common good, might better promote the general welfare. If we're going to promote better listening in the world, we might do well to start at home. We need to learn to listen to ourselves so that we'll know how to listen to one another. We need to learn to listen to ourselves by listening to our lives, the voices of our lives. My thoughts over these past couple of weeks have often turned to various times in my life when my life has spoken to me in ways that I couldn't help but to pay attention. At least eventually I was forced to pay attention. A very good friend of mine once gave me some sage advice. He said, "We have a lot of voices in our heads, Charlie. All of us have a lot of voices in our heads, and our job is to choose which one is going to be the captain, which one we're going to listen to, which one we're going to heed." There was a time in my life some 40 years ago when the sentiments of that advice really saved my life. I was 22 years old, recently divorced. I was going through what had been and remains still the most painful chapter of my life. I was quite broken. I regularly heard lots of negative voices demanding my attention. "You're a failure," they would say. "You have no purpose or value in being. You don't belong anywhere. Your pain is just too much to bear." The voices often went on in what seemed like endless chorus, a chorus that grew even darker and even more despairing. But there were other voices that came from some inner place as well. They were voices that were more hopeful. They said, you can get through this. You can heal. You will experience joy again. The only problem was that these more affirming voices seemed to be coming from the back seat, while the negative ones were up front, steering the car. They were the ones who were in charge. And finally, I recognized that I had to choose which voice would be captain. I started to encourage the voices that were sitting in the back seat to speak up and be heard. So many times, though, they would just be shouted down by the voices in the front. And eventually, I decided that if those negative voices were going to be relentless in making me miserable, the positive voices, the ones that I was choosing to be captain, could be just as relentless in encouraging me towards wholeness. That's when things got a little interesting. The voices would get into these huge arguments, vying for control. I remember one night when that became a very literal experience. I was wandering through the dark streets of my neighborhood on the north side of Chicago. I was miserable, and the voices were going at it relentlessly in my head. There's no hope in things ever getting better, one would say. And then the other one would say, there's every reason in the world for hope. No heartbreak can destroy that hope. And the scrimmage between these voices was brutal. And for a while, neither voice had the edge over the other one. And then it occurred to me that I could actually give voice out loud to the one that I wanted to choose, to that which I wanted to follow. And at that point, the affirming voice began to shout out loud at the negative voice, which I had imprisoned in silence by rendering it mute. So there I was, walking around in my Rogers Park neighborhood, shouting at the top of my lungs for all I was worth. You can do this! You can do this! I suppose anyone witnessing that event would have surely attested to my insanity. The truth of it is, though, that the insanity is what had preceded that experience. The incident itself was a sane and urgent battle to save my life. I needed to hear out loud the life-affirming voice that I was beginning to have a growing faith in. And I needed to hear it more clearly than the life-denying voice that I was so afraid of. That night, walking those streets, yelling out loud at myself, was the beginning of a healing process in which, eventually, faith did win out over fear. That voice, that affirming voice, has stayed with me all of these years since. It spoke to me assuringly when 6 years later I was able to trust enough to venture once again into marriage, and this time even into parenthood. It spoke to me ever so clearly 16 years after that dark night, when unexpectedly on a Sunday morning it said, ministry. I'm going to be a Unitarian Universalist minister. That inner voice has spoken my life to me on so many occasions, large and small, telling me who I am so that I might know what it is that I need to do. I haven't always been such a good listener, but when it's been most important, the voice of my life has almost always been as clear and demanding to me as my late mother's voice, which I can still always hear. Some of you might remember the sermon I gave just last year, my mother's voice saying, listen here, Buster, and listen good. I don't imagine that anyone here has had the exact same kinds of experiences that I've had, or the same as anyone else here might have had. But what I do suspect is that everyone here has had what developmental psychologist James Fowler, who is also a theologian, refers to as the shipwreck experience. This is a life episode he describes in which most of us experience a painful loss or some kind of major discouragement. And this usually happens for the first time somewhere in late adolescence or early adulthood, when our suppositions and assumptions about the world and even the universe are found terribly wanting in the face of a difficult reality that we had not imagined. That first experience, he said, is often the most traumatic, but succeeding ones can often be quite challenging enough. If we fail to come to terms with the original or any subsequent shipwrecks, we deny that voice within each of us that tells us the truth about our lives. We deny for ourselves the greater possibilities of soulful growth, both spiritual and psychological. If we deny our experience, deny that voice, we cripple ourselves, both in the capacity to connect deeply and spiritually within, as well as in our abilities to connect with others who have somehow learned to navigate their way through their own personal storms. And so our challenge, one that I suspect many of us here, if not most, have accomplished time and again, at least to one degree and another, when we have encountered some sort of shipwreck, is to reimagine our lives, reimagine the world with a larger and more meaningful vision of truth. Whatever we might now, in our new understandings of truth, hold it to be. Our act of reimagining our lives is an act of faith. The product of that faith is the gift of hope. Hope in a future of ever-expanding spheres of meaning and value and purpose. The gateway to this faith-building, hope-forging enterprise is through listening. The first step towards spiritual maturity is always listening. The ancient psalmist understood this process. The psalmist very poetically anointed that inner voice with the moniker of the highest esteem. He called it Lord and God. What others of us might call the captain, or any of a number of names. I waited patiently for the Lord, wrote the psalmist. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of my miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. The psalmist searches within to find solace from his woes, to find ground even to stand upon. And there, within his deepest yearning, within his deepest listening, he discovers that inner voice of redemption, that voice of renewal, and the cause for hope. He put a new song in my mouth, the psalmist celebrates, a song of praise. Before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. I know that not everyone here is going through some sort of existential or metaphysical crisis, but I know too that some of you are. I also know that those of you who are not currently in the midst of one have been through such storms in your lives, and you will be again. However it might be with you right now, it always seems a good time to be listening as best we can. Some of us are very intentional and quite disciplined in the art of listening. Some of us sit Zen or in other forms of quiet meditation. Some of us do walking or biking or other forms of more active meditation. Some of us listen most intently while we're looking out over a lake or a river or maybe the ocean. This time of year, some of us listen most closely to our inner longings while looking out upon a breathtaking October forest. Some of us gain such entree to our inner voices by listening to the melodic strains of inspiring music as we just did a moment ago. Many of us find all kinds of different places and ways to be sure that we are listening to our lives as they tell us who we are, so that we might better know what it is that we are here to do. Some of us, though, aren't so very disciplined in the arts of listening. How is it with you? Are you in some sort of crisis at this moment, some sort of challenging growth opportunity in this particular passage of your life? Are you somewhere in between the challenges that are the milestones that are framing the narrative of your life? Wherever you might be on your journey, what is your spiritual discipline for living, for listening? Do you relish the opportunity to engage in larger understandings of truth, however unsettling that truth might be? Do you avoid listening to the depths of your being for fear of the pain that might accompany your hearing, like I did on that dark night in Chicago, until your life has to shout out at you in order to get your attention? Or are you somewhere in between those places? Sometimes listening does mean engaging in the pain that lurks below the surface of our day-to-day conscious world. Be patient, Roca tells us. Be patient toward all that is unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. We were never promised a pain-free existence. The only promise we've been given is that we are capable of living until we die. To live fully, to redeem this gift of life that has been given to us, we need to listen. We need to hear. We need to heed what our lives are telling us about who we are. To do that, we have to listen in order to embolden our faith, to grow our faith, is to give birth and to nurture our cause for hope. From there, we're able to move out into the world, and then in the world, we can bring our better honed skills at listening. From our ability to hear ourselves, we can begin to hear others, and from our ability to hear others, we can grow our faith in one another. And from that common faith, we can cultivate a hope in the endless possibilities of goodness in the world around us. We can't help any of that to happen now. If we begin with all the answers, we have to start with the questions, and from within the questions, listen for the answers, listen to our lives and to each other's lives, where we might one day find our way into some of the answers that we're looking for. The point is, Rilke said, the point is to live everything. Live in the questions now, and perhaps we will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. And so, my friends, toward that end, I wish you a good journey today and every day of your life. I wish you good listening through all the storms and through the calm of your life. I wish you good listening today and every day. Blessed be, and amen. Let's join together in singing our closing hymn. It's River